sorry I was late. I'm sorry. I'm always late. That's how you know it's me. That's like my version of blue check mark is if I'm late, then you know that it's the real me. It's not a deep fake showing up.
That's right. I was actually worried about the deep fake.
If he shows up on time, I get worried. Like, is everything all right, man? You stressed? Like, what's wrong?
I am not a deep fake, Jay. By the way, I actually like Biden now. That's my hot take.
Well, welcome back, everybody. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I have the Jay Dyer and Tristan Haggard. How you guys doing today?
Well, if you said the is in like one thing, like we are separate.
You guys in 2018,
we're an evil dyad. We're one entity that's an evil dyad.
I got into Jay's work through your guys' conversations back in 2018 on carnivore, and you're getting into the Tavistock and Laurel Canyon and all that different stuff. And I took a road trip, and that was back when Tristan's room was a lot darker. There was barely any light in some of those videos,
like his soul.
And I took a road trip all the way from California to Indiana, and all I did was listen to your guys' podcasts. And that's what really got me into some of the, again, like the Hollywood stuff. I wasn't really familiar with any of that. But you guys talking about carnivore and a lot of the sort of Rockefeller institutions, all that different stuff, the Rockefeller Foundation. And so, yeah. So I'm actually really excited then to have you guys come on together to talk about technology and magic. You know, we Arthur C. Clarke, but Jay, you just did a video over on InfoWars that was really good, talking about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into was Tristan talking about Fire in the Minds of Men, which I have right here, and this kind of clicked a few dots together for you. And so I was curious if you want to just open up, talk a little bit about what it is about fire. What was Tristan talking about that kind of connected some thoughts for you that didn't put together this whole Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, technology, Satanism, magic thing together?
So I had a professor in undergrad and grad school that was like a expert on modern Europe, and he was a wild character. He was a weirdo, but really smart guy, and he made us do really in-depth research into the French Revolution, like way more than I actually cared about. But in order to get through those classes with him, we had to read I think in undergrad we had to read 2,000 pages on French Revolution again, and that was something that I found interesting, but not that interesting. I wasn't 2,000 page interested in French Revolution. So I've got a whole shelf over there, and then I had him again in a grad class on revolutionary thought or something like that. But modern Europe and revolutions. I don't remember the name of that class, but in the way it works at my university, you have to write. Like I was in with the undergrads, and I just had to do more work. So I would be taking an undergrad class. But it was a grad class, so I would have to write, a 30-page paper instead of a 20-page paper. Anyway, So we had to do more work in the grad class, and I got really deep into French Revolutionary stuff through him. And he was, like I said, a character. So he wasn't actually a liberal. He was like a weird kind of atheistic right-winger old guy who had achieved tenure, so he didn't really care about what he said, and he could kind of get away with stuff. So he gave us a fairly based approach to the French Revolution, which surprised me, being that it was such a liberal university that I went to. And so I was listening to Tristan today earlier on his stream, and he was talking about Nesta Webster, and I'd forgotten a lot of this material because I took this class in probably 2004 or 5, and then the grad class in probably 2000.
Did he have you read Webster's book on the French Revolution?
Well, so I read Nesta Webster's whole book. He let us pick. And he actually was not a fan of that because there's some things that Nesta Webster said that were kind of discrediting. I think that the book overall is good. The overall thesis of Nesta Webster is good, except that she had these weird comments, something about, I'm just going from memory, but something about how she thought that like the revolutionaries were talking directly to Satan, and it just kind of discredited her. I mean, I think they were, but I don't think that they were like talking like face to face through it.
My critique would be the worst thing about it is she's kind of like, has this British Whig history take, and then she has this slant where she also basically exonerates British Masonry, and it's like,
Right.
well, the British Masons are good and they're really cool, but it's the Grand Orient that really went off, and the Templar aspects within the Grand Orient, but like, you know, for the most part, British Masonry is based, she basically says, and I obviously disagree with that.
Yeah, so he let me use it as a source, even though he kind of frowned on it because he thought it was a little too ridiculous. But the other sources were all kind of like Palmer and like really mainstream stuff. But if I recall, I think Napoleon and the French Revolution are the two things in history that have like the most books. Like you could never read all the books on Napoleon and the French Revolution. Anyway, so long story short, I had forgotten a lot of this material, and I had forgotten that in that class he had talked about how the États Généraux, the different estates, which is the different areas, structures in society in France at that time, how the journalists had become the sort of moral arbiters for the revolutionaries, because if you want to replace church and state, you've got to have institutions or persons that step up to replace what the church did. Right? So the church, you know, morally speaking, called out vices and tried to promote virtue. And so since the church needed to be gotten away with, I'd forgotten that the journalists now stepped up to play that role. And so I really appreciate Tristan bringing that out from Billington. And it was just
to interject, if you don't mind, that was a stream I did on Taylor Lorenz and Gonzalo Lira.
Yeah.
And I talked about journalism and how it really is a revolutionary priesthood.
Right.
And I like that you mentioned like the idea of denunciations and like the cancel culture. That's straight out of the French Revolution.
Yeah, I totally forgot all that.
And virtue signaling, right? Saint Just was like the master virtue signaler. You read about Saint Just. This guy was the revolutionary ascetic who prided himself on going back to nature, right? Which you see a lot of this today. You see it in like the black woke community. You see it in the neo-pagan white woke community, like back to nature, right?
Well, the hippie, the archaic revival, all of this 60s counterculture stuff is pulling from the Rousseau type, you know, get away from civilization because it's a emasculating force type thing.
And like Rousseau and these people, they could only propagate those ideas to the aristocracy and the nobility who were living degenerate lifestyles detached from any actual labor or work anyway. So it's like these were ridiculous ideas coming from ridiculous people who were living a decadent life. I think it's important to remember.
Yeah, our professor pointed out how that whole story about let them eat cake, that's all made up. It was revolutionary propaganda. But part of the reason that they justified beheading Marie Antoinette was that, oh, you see, she's not properly a social justice promoter because she's, you know, mocking everyone by saying, oh, if the poor are hungry, let them eat the cake. And it's just like what Tristan was saying with the idea of like, oh, so-and-so, Baron so-and-so is fat, so he's clearly part of the bourgeoisie, so he can't be, you know.
You get denounced for what you represent, not just for what you do. So it's like now you see, oh, well, I can't talk to this person because I can't give him a platform. We don't want to platform his ideas. You know, this Jay Dyer person, he's a huge bigot. He's a Chad nerd. We don't want to platform Chad nerddom. You know, it's like so they'll cancel you for like not even what you said. We just think you represent this because you like Joe Rogan. So like Rogan's clearly right wing extremist racist or something. You know,
it totally works with like a sort of immunological defense, right? This contagion of belief systems is, I think, totally consistent than we see with the Great Reset, using COVID, using medical procedures, viruses to just enable, again, this sort of psychological revolution, this spiritual revolution, all these different things. They're using the immune system as a sort of metaphor for this entire transition in society.
Like Tristan pointed out in his stream, talking about Billington and Auguste Comte and Saint Just and these different revolutionaries, they were very influenced by a lot of older socialist ideas and things that come out of Plato that ultimately would be technocracy. And so the reason that ties into Lewis and Tolkien was just that I'd been reading the Space Trilogy by Lewis, and I'm almost done with the third one, and the third one is very different from the first two. I mean, they're all good in their own way, but it's clearly a critique of technocracy of the Tavistock Institute, people like Bertrand Russell, the Royal Society, the plan to depopulate, and a lot. I was watching like sort of normie theologians and people at evangelical seminaries that have lectures up on YouTube, and none of them seem to really be able to figure out. Well, I don't know what the third book is about. I can't figure it out. What does it mean? It's and they really like the mythological elements of part 1 and 2 and telling the Christian story through mythology, which is what he does in the first 2. But in the third one, it's a hardcore critique of literally like the scientism, illuminate, confirm. I mean, he just goes like totally, and it's also like aliens or demons, this kind of stuff, which will parallel well with Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. But
is that one the hideous strength one? Yeah. Because I have that one. I printed it out and I bound it. But do you have to read the first 2 to even understand the third? Skip.
So they kind of operate on their own, but I mean, you could theoretically read each one on their own. The first one is really small, so it's actually you can read it really quick. It's pretty thin. The third one. Does it
have any like more than 2-syllable words in it? Because I won't be able to.
Oh, so but you can read now. I thought you were just kind of like you had a little.
I've been working on it.
I thought you had a little device of like a voice that sounds like
Google Translate,
like a robot voice.
I just have the help. I have that. What I do is with my hands behind my back, I pace around my chateau, drinking champagne, and the help walks behind me reading it. And sometimes I don't pay attention. And I tell them to back up, and they don't realize sometimes when I stop paying attention. So you have to reprimand them sometimes.
Tristan has hired a poor indigent man to roll around in a wheelchair and just read to him all day long as he walks around.
That's
but he can barely speak English, so it's like I got to read to you Childhood's End. Anyway, that was dumb. I'm sorry. Don't kick me off.
No, we renounced Jay. We're gonna the revolutionary.
Tristan likes to interrupt, so he just interrupts, and I lose my train of thought. He knows how to push my buttons. He does this. This is what he does. I'm trying
to help add something to the conversation. Now we've just completely derailed. Now I'm in trouble.
What were we talking about?
We were talking.
You were talking about this hideous strength. That hideous strength. I asked you the title of it. Yeah.
So
I love Tristan. I'm just joking.
So how technology, again, the premise for today's stream was Arthur C. Clarke's any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Some of my research, I've been tying drugs and recategorizing them as technologies, techniques for a means to an end in regards to transcendence. And I've been trying to trace the use of drugs, psychedelics specifically, into the 20th century, 21st century, and how then Silicon Valley and this whole digital interface, this transhumanist spirituality is tied with drugs. And that technology as a form of spirituality, I believe, one of my premises is that we're building basically a technological cybernetic body for the evil one. And that's the premise of that hideous strength. So basically, they're trying to create a way to for man to basically be uploaded and transcend his bodily existence. And so the villain of this novel ends up being a scientist whose head is decapitated, like a literal head, and the head is strapped up to all these beakers and these tubes and whatnot. And they think that they're getting these. It's actually just speaking the voice of Satan, and so it's the Black Archon, is who Lewis calls it's the name for Satan, and it's basically saying, we figured out the scientific mysteries, and what we're going to do is, in order to transcend bodily existence, it says we're going to have to cleanse the world of organic biological life. Right.
And so I'm pretty clear now. There's no doubt in my mind, because I'm almost done with it now, that Lewis had pretty much stumbled onto the Luciferian transhumanist plot that people at the Royal Society, the Tavistock Institute, were 100% a part of. And I mean, he even gets into more mundane things like that we all know about, like the Institute like sparks a riot, and they control the liberal and the right wing. They control the media in the UK. Lewis includes all of that in the novel. And the reason it ties into Tolkien is that the central protagonist character in the first 2 stories is Tolkien.
Right.
So he has the character Elwin Ransom, who is a philologist, language professor at Oxford or Cambridge or wherever he's supposed to be from. And he even says at the end of the book that it's based on Tolkien. And little side note, he also says that the secret to understanding the Space Trilogy this is supposed to be a letter that Tolkien writes to Lewis, but it's just fictional. It's Lewis puts himself into the book, writing to Professor Ransom, and Ransom replies and says, I noticed in covering the ancient 12th century manuscripts of the Neoplatonists that he had found references to some of the beings that he had met on his journey. So this is supposed to be a clue to help you figure out. So in other words, Lewis is saying that the hero who is going to expose the plot of the Illuminate Confirm is this philologist professor from Oxford who will have to write his story in fiction because nobody will believe him. Right. And if we think about that's really what the Lord of the Rings is about and what Lewis's trilogy is about, that makes a lot of sense. It makes perfect sense. Anyway, but the reason it ties into what you're talking about, long story short, is just that what you said about the villains in the third one are in league with Satan. Right. They call him the fallen archon, the fallen angel. And he wants to cleanse Earth of biological existence so that man can evolve and achieve the next level of evolution and transcendence.
Right. I like the way you said that he says he controls like both sides of the political spectrum. And something I was talking about, and maybe it was 2 or 3 streams ago, I forget which one it was, but how the idea, the right and the left, and I know you've spoken about this as well, Jay, is this comes straight out of the French Revolution also, right? Exactly. Like the committee was divided up, the extreme factions of the right and the left through
Jacobins and Girondins.
Right. Yeah. So and this all happened on a tennis court, this game.
Exactly.
this very whatever bourgeois game. I mean, that's fantastic the way that that he breaks that down. Now, I think something that Jay has done such a great job of showing is the incoherence of rationalism and scientism as a worldview. And, in many of the debates that you've done, as well as countless amounts of streams and videos that you've made about how Enlightenment rationalism is completely actually irrational. And
well, get this. So in the first one, the villain is a professor who is like an atheist materialist, right? And the first one is about space travel. They go to what's called Mars. It's called Malacandra in the novel, but it's Mars. And by the end of that story, you think that the villain is still an atheist materialist, but in part 2, he comes back and he's had a spiritual experience. And so part 2 takes place on Venus, and Venus in this narrative is still unfallen. And the purpose of the evil professor going there is to cause Venus to undergo its fall. So it has its angelic testing, and he tries to bring about the fall, and he's changed. He's received an initiation in a Luciferian power that makes him almost superhuman. And so they actually engage in this big battle. And so Ransom, who is Tolkien in the story, but Ransom is also deified by an angel to help fight against his enemy professor, who basically takes a Teilhard worldview. So he goes from an atheistic materialist worldview, and then he becomes a Teilhardian who believes that they have to introduce death to all of the planets and all the worlds in the universe to bring in the next phase of evolution. So what's awesome about it is that Lewis is like, every novel is a super hardcore critique of evolution, at least in this Luciferian type of sense. I mean, not in the sense of like, adaptation of species, but you know what I'm saying? Right. Like the idea that, like, I mean, each novel kind of has certain figures that you could think of as kind of being emblematic of who the villain is. And certainly by volume 2, the villain has transformed from like a Bertrand Russell into a Teilhard de Chardin, basically.
And just in the introduction of Billington's book too, he gets into this, the idea that the revolutionary faith, and that's what he calls it. And this is a secular guy, as far as I know. I think Billington, he writes like he's very pro-revolution. He thinks it's real cool, and he gets a little poetic in passages, or he likes it. He thinks it's cool. It's Promethean. It's this and that. It's Pythagorean. It's mystical. It's spiritual, and he calls it the revolutionary faith. So, Fire in the Minds of Men: Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. In the introduction, here's a quick quote, and this really ties in with what both you guys have done such a great job at exploring on your channels. The revolutionary faith was shaped not so much by the critical rationalism of the French Enlightenment, as is generally believed, as by the occultism and proto-romanticism of Germany. This faith was incubated in France during the revolutionary era within a small subculture of literary intellectuals who were immersed in journalism, fascinated by secret societies, and subsequently infatuated with ideologies as a secular surrogate for religious belief.
Right.
Well, the villain too, in the third one, the possessed head. The reason it's a head is that it's symbolic of just pure mind and reason.
Yeah.
And so the entity says that he wants to, quote, purify Earth to make it like the moon. The moon is beautiful because it is pure death and dust, and to be bodiless is the goal of man. And so he thinks that if he can convince basically the Tavistock Institute, and it's called NICE in the book, the National Institute for Coordinated Experiments. He says if we can convince them to get everybody in line and to kill everybody, we can transcend and move into that purely etheric existence, is what he says.
Dude, that's crazy. So in another book that I keep bringing it back to because I'm reading it really slowly. It's Demons from Fyodor Dostoevsky. There is a character who this character is not Shigalyov. The name doesn't matter, but the character is kind of poetically and frantically explaining his worldview and why his literary work is all about trying to scientifically explore why everyone doesn't kill themselves, right? So he's like, my whole work right now is I'm trying to figure out why everyone doesn't just kill themselves. And then he ends up saying that, like, basically, if you kill yourself, you transcend life and death, right? And he says the fear of death is God, right? So he starts to deify this fear of death. And then he ends up at the conclusion that if we all kill ourselves, and if I kill myself, I become God. So if we can all just kill ourselves, then we'll become God. And then man will become an idea. Man will transcend his physical world. So it's like,
it's a neo-Gnostic. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And the revolutionary spirit that is underneath scientism is the same spirit that you see in the book, like Dostoevsky's book, Demons. It is a spirit that is chaotic, destructive, and it's about annihilation. It starts with the premise of, there's this other passage in this book. He says, I start with the premise of unlimited freedom. I start with the premise of unlimited freedom, and I end with the premise of unlimited despotism. Yep. And that's really what you're looking at.
Yeah. When Haggard did an interview on that, that's exactly the line he picked out too, to highlight. So,
when you're talking about neo-Gnosticism, that goes, I think that the existential impulse of Gnosticism is sort of that and like Neoplatonism, this focuses on unity. And so when you were talking about Tolkien and the Ring, I think that reminded me again, this emphasis on unity, the utopia, the ultimate coming back to source. But the existentialist impulse is how magic, even the presence of psychedelics within Christianity, is tied to these Gnostic heretics. But the practice of magic, the existential use of matter to transcend matter, whether it be through drugs or ritualistic magic, is then tied with the development of technology. And so now we see transhumanism as the obvious outcome of this sort of magical presupposition that's ancient. And the Gnostics they thought, I have stuff from Hippolytus and Irenaeus describing Gnostic sects, saying they are the continuation of the ancient mystery traditions, but they use Christianity because the symbolism of Christianity, they believe, fulfills what they're talking about. It's just an inverted understanding of it.
Tristan, did you want? Are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at some quotes in here. I'll just I'll wait and let you guys riff a little bit and jump in later.
I'm looking at my notes here.
We'll just talk a little bit about.
I found this quote. I was looking for a different one, but I did find the quote where he talks about God killing God. Right. I think this is really Gnosticism. This idea of the demiurge and conquering nature and transcending the physical world. Oh, I just lost the page again. So he says that. Man is afraid of death because he loves life. That's how I understand it, says the other guy he's talking with. And that is what nature tells us, right? So it's kind of this naturalistic perspective. And the other guy comes back, he says, that's base. That is the whole deceit. His eyes began to flash. Life is pain, life is fear, and man is unhappy. Now all is pain and fear. Now man loves life because he loves pain and fear. That's how they've made it. Life now is given in exchange for pain and fear, and that is the whole deceit. Man is now not yet the right man. There will be a new man, happy and proud. He for whom it will make no difference whether he lives or does not live, he will be the new man. He who overcomes pain and fear will himself be God, and this God will not be. So this God exists, in your opinion, he says? He doesn't, yet he does. There is no pain in the stone, but there is pain in the fear of the stone. God is the pain of the fear of death. He who overcomes pain and fear will himself become God. Then there will be a new life, a new man, everything new. Then history will be divided into two parts, from the gorilla to the destruction of God, and from the destruction of God to, the other guy says, to the gorilla? He says, to the physical changing of the earth and man. Man will be God and will change physically, and the world will change, and deeds will change, and thoughts and feelings. What do you think? Will man then change physically? He says, if it makes no difference whether one lives or does not live, then everyone will kill himself, and perhaps that will be the change. He says it makes no difference. They will kill the deceit. So life's deceit, life's delusion, it's illusion. You can't know anything. Man will kill the deceit. Whoever wants the main freedom must dare to kill himself. He who dares to kill himself knows the secret of the deceit. There is no further freedom. Here is everything, and there is nothing further. He who dares to kill himself is God. Now, anyone can make it so that there will be no God, and there will be no anything. But no one has done it yet, not once. So it's like completely insane babble, but really does get to the bottom of like the psychotic desire to transcend the physical realm by your own will, right? Rather than through the will of God and through submission to the will of God. It's no, we're all monkeys, but we're going to become gods by killing everything and burning everything to the ground. And it's an absolute, and this is reason and logic that tells us to do this, of course, right? Science means 2 + 2 = 4. Therefore, kill everything and you're God. This is what these people literally think.
Well, in Lord of the Rings, if you remember, the part of the problem that occurs is that the bad guys are stumbling on technology. So Saruman begins to use gunpowder. He also genetically modifies and breeds.
Yes, the orcs.
And then the problem with Sauron is that he's disembodied, and in this case wants to be embodied.
Right.
But the reason he wants to be embodied is to basically bring death, to Middle Earth.
Well, can you speak to that about, I mean, how is that understood in our Orthodox Christian perspective of, it seems like this embodiment of Satan, whether it be the Antichrist or again, this Christian teleology, eschatology, and eventually it's the New Jerusalem, but before the New Jerusalem, they're creating an inversion of it. And in a way, we're giving Satan a sort of technological body, which in this existential quest for man creating life, it's actually a death cult.
Yeah, I think that you have a dialectic in extreme anti-Christian or anti-theist worldviews. You can have the dialectic of we must worship body and bodily pleasures in the kind of hedonistic, LaVey style Satanism. But you have the opposite extreme, which is the body is evil. We got to, upload to the cloud or whatever. And both of those are delusions. Right. And what's interesting is that in both stories, both trilogies, Tolkien's trilogy focuses on the fact that Satan would like to be embodied. And then Lewis's trilogy has the opposite. I think they're both just critiquing different aspects of evil philosophies. But the Ring also, by the way, if you recall, it's like the ability to manipulate space and time, right? To not be seen, to see outside of space and time, kind of like what we do with our magic mirrors. Galadriel has a magic mirror. The Palantir stone, like it's a two-way communication mirror. Even the big tech companies, I think Peter Thiel's thing was at one time Palantir, right?
Well, I know he's been funding a lot of stuff with getting like young blood, putting like juvenile blood into people so they stay younger.
Yeah, Eddie Bravo went off on that last night. dude, have you seen this? Dude, like, that's bullshit, dude. Anyway, but so yeah, we talked about that a lot last night. But yeah, I mean, there's also the technology of there's one other point that I was gonna. There's a critique of tech in Lord of the Rings. Trying to remember what it was. Oh, anyway, long story. Basically, the idea is just that the forces of evil in the novel want a mechanized tech control. Oh, the all-seeing eye, right? Sauron's eye is basically an attempt to have like total information awareness, kind of a perpetual surveillance state.
Right, and that's what I was getting at. Is don't you? That's what I'm curious. What your opinion is, like. The 5G, the cybernetic skeleton on the planet is sort of Satan. He's not omnipotent. He can't be anywhere at once. But with the digital technology, he can be in China. He can be in my bank account. He can know what's being posted on Brazil.
It's the closest mimic to omniscience, exactly.
Which is it's just a false form, and it's a man-made form. And so I was speculating. I'd be interested to get your opinion on the Antichrist and an inversion of Christ being fully God, fully man. The Antichrist is fully machine, fully man.
Yeah, and you got Google engineers who are saying we're going to make an AI god that we'll worship too. Right?
Very possible. I mean, I think mainly the way I would contrast this is so Lewis and Tolkien are like they represent 20th century fiction writers that present the Christian worldview and the Christian paradigm to critique the scientific worldview, the atheistic materialistic worldview. And somebody like Arthur C. Clarke represents precisely the opposite.
Exactly.
I mean, he's the person who represents what they're critiquing.
Right.
And you can see that through many. I mean, I haven't read a whole bunch of it. I've read a couple of his things, and I've got some obscure stuff from Clarke too that will blow you guys away. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Jamie found this. There's this old book that he has from the 80s talking about what life would be like in 2020 or 2019. So he has a whole chapter on life and sexuality, and I'm not going to say all the words that you can't say, but basically he says there will be ads by the year 2020 where I can't read it. I actually shared it on Instagram, but basically it's a want ad for meeting up with a partner who has changed and has different organs and who has proof of stabby. So like he was saying back in the 80s, like he predicting that basically the TRANS world that was coming.
Right. And then when you look at what happened last year, you did have advertisements from Grindr and Tinder and these other apps. I don't use Tinder, but Grindr, right? No, but they had these ads from Grindr and Tinder where it was like they were advertising that you can get a person who's got their paperwork together, right? Like you got all your papers.
Exactly. Yeah, he said back in the 80s he was saying that. Bunch of weird.
Wasn't he kind of a pervert too? Like, wasn't he?
No, he was like, he was in the circles of Crowley. Yeah.
Wow.
If I recall, he was.
I'm not too familiar with Arthur C. Yeah.
Well, so everybody probably knows about. He wrote 2001.
Right. I know that. Yeah, that's about as what I know in his science fiction career, and then the quote. Which I think is totally accurate. I agree with it as an Orthodox Christian.
Right. So the thing about in the real version of 2001, the idea was that when Space Baby comes about, Space Baby nukes Earth. So the real plot that he wanted Kubrick to have was that it was depopulation is what I'm trying to say. And Kubrick was like, "No, that's a little much. We're not going to have space.
Too on the nose.
We're not going to have Space Baby like nuke the Earth, so let's not do that. Audiences won't like that." But in 3001, which is later on in the series, you've seen 2001, I assume, right?
No, I haven't. Actually,
you've never seen. Okay, no. You should watch that because at the end, Bowman, the astronaut, he basically steps outside of space and time, and he has to go through like a wormhole to do that. And the universe is more or less, it's kind of like the Matrix. It's the universe is presented as kind of living in a matrix. Bowman is the astronaut who goes through the black hole and steps outside of space and time, and it basically achieves a kind of rebirth as a god.
Wow.
Yeah. So but it doesn't end there because Arthur C. Clarke continues the series. In 2010, he actually brings in Luciferian stuff. So the universe then gets repopulated. Other planets get seeded with humans because the entity that went into the next dimension is now combined with computers, and he's eventually called, there's Hal, which is the computer, and then Bowman, the guy, the astronaut, who at first thinks he's fighting Hal, but they actually end up combining to become Halman, and he becomes this kind of god creature living computer that's like a chariot that rides through the universe. Yeah, so it's like totally apotheosis.
Wow.
100%, yeah. And to make it really clear, in Childhood's End, which is his super Crowleyan novel, in this story it's a little different. It's kind of like the classic alien story where the aliens suddenly show up, their ships over all the big cities, right? And they kind of give people gifts that people think they're good, right? Like they heal people, they give us, all this advanced technology. Oh, everybody thinks he's great. And the alien's name is Karellen, and you never see him, but then eventually when he's shown, he's like a straight up demon. And the novel literally presents the alien as a demon.
Wow.
And he says, oh, by the way, I need your children. And so they take basically all the high IQ indigo children, and they fly off in the spaceship, the aliens do, with the choice children, the elite children, and then they nuke the planet. So Arthur C. Clarke was like obsessed with nuking the planet, and so and stealing all your kids. By the way, he was a creeper. So,
dude, it's crazy when you like this sci-fi, and that's written in, was it the 50s? When did he write that?
Let me look.
Let me see.
Yeah, so 20th century sci-fi, and you look at 19th century like Russian fiction, which is like fiction / nonfiction, in Demons by Dostoevsky, in the passage where Rogan, this guy, talks about he starts off this long monologue by saying, everybody who was studying man before, they didn't get it. They didn't know real science, right? Like nobody understood real science, but I figured it all out, and I'm going to need 10 nights for each chapter of my book to explain to you how we're going to reorder society rationally and scientifically. And he goes through this whole rant, and he basically, so he says, he says, we need to kill everybody. We need to kill 90% of the population, right? We need to get 90% of the population and kill them off. 10% of the population will live as gods, basically, and the rest of them will just be a hive mind herd who have no property, no family, nothing. And this is going to be good. And we know this because of science. And he starts out the whole rant with that famous quote about, he says, Plato, Rousseau, Fourier, aluminum columns. All this is fit perhaps for sparrows, but not for human society. But since the future social form is necessary precisely now, when we are all finally going to act so as to stop any further thinking about it, I'm suggesting my own system of world organization. Here it is. He says that I got entangled in my own data, but my conclusion directly contradicts the original idea from which I start. Starting from unlimited freedom, I conclude with unlimited despotism. I will add, however, that apart from my solution to the social formula, there can be no other. There's no other solution, right? So he says, we have to kill off 90% of the population, and then they start the group that he's meeting with. They start arguing over whether this is okay or whether let's just do it the more liberal way, I guess, which would be the more kind of Frankfurt School way. We're slowly with propaganda will bring about the same thing. None of them disagree with the initial premise, though, right. Is that the initial premise is we need to scientifically manage all of this because we are, highly evolved men of reason, and all these idiots in the past had no idea what they were doing, right? And then in the next segment, this other character, Pyotr Stepanovich, starts yelling at Stavrogan about Shugoyov, and he goes even further, right? So the young nihilist revolutionary goes even further than the slightly older, more studied, hyper-liberal revolutionary. And he just starts going off on how he says only one thing is lacking in the world: obedience. The thirst for education is already an aristocratic thirst. As soon as there's just a tiny bit of family or love, there's a desire for property. We'll extinguish desire. We'll get drinking, gossip, denunciation going. We'll get unheard of depravity going. We'll stifle every genius in infancy. Everything reduced to a common denominator. Complete equality. We've learned a trade and we're honest people. We don't need anything else. That was the recent response of the English workers. Only the necessary is necessary. Henceforth, that is the motto of the whole globe. But there is also a need for convulsion. This will be taken care of by us, the rulers. Slaves must have rulers. Complete obedience, complete impersonality. But once every 30 years, Shigoyov gets a convulsion going, and they all suddenly start devouring each other up to a certain point, simply so as not to be bored. Boredom is an aristocratic sensation. In Shigoyovism, there will be no desires. Desire and suffering are for us, and for the slaves, Shigoyovism. It's like completely demonic. Right. Destruction, depravity will destroy the family.
And whether it's Dostoevsky or Tolkien, I mean, they're describing like this impulse of evil that is continually destroying the image of God in man to remake him into this new thing. So it is only a Christian perspective can put frame and understanding how this is totally a spiritual reality. And, what the stories, it doesn't matter what time, if you're in the Soviet Union or you're in Britain, it's the same story of this sort of death of man in order for this false form of life to occur.
Yeah, the head in That Hideous Strength says, we must create a dead world to save man.
Wow. So no will, no freedom. I mean, it's the same idea expressed in a revolutionary in Russia in Dostoevsky's Demons as in Tolkien's like sci-fi. I
mean, well, that was Lewis's Hideous Strength, but it's the same idea because Sauron, I think I said Saruman a minute ago. I meant to say Sauron. He wants to bring death and destruction to all of Middle Earth as well.
Right.
Because and the idea is like, oh, that's the only way to have perfect unity, perfect equality, perfect whatever, is by destroying everything. Year zero, right? This is the revolutionary impetus, is to start everything over, great reset. Right. Just push the reset button on the Nintendo and start over, right?
So, Jay, what are your thoughts on, again, this technology being totally interwoven with magic? And people code, they're not in, but at the highest levels, I mean, whether it be the Jack Parsons or some of the global elite, I mean, can you speak to the indistinguishable, as Arthur C. Clarke talked about, separation between magic and really the technologies that we're in the Great Reset that are being implemented now to dissolve all boundaries? And Tristan's talked about the transhumanism, transgenderism, the food. They're dissolving all the distinctions between things.
Yeah, they're in Huxley's Perennial Philosophy book. He says that that's the goal, is to make everything blend into a blob. And he says that they need a religion for the New World Order that would be a blob religion. So that's an overlooked book that I think is key to understanding this too, because a lot of people, not you guys, but a lot of people, when they look at the New World Order, they look at these, they don't think about the spiritual element of it,
right?
And spirituality. I mean, they might say, oh, it's satanic. Yeah, but there's actually a philosophy behind it too. And Huxley wrote a whole book about what he thought the religion of the future would be, as did H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells has a book that Jamie found. We did a podcast on it called God the Invisible King. And in the book, he actually says, I'm not an atheist. Like, people think I'm an atheist. I'm not an atheist. He's like, I believe that there is a God of the future, but it's like that God will be kind of an emergent God that is, he says, quote, Lucifer.
Wow.
And Huxley does, I don't recall him using the word Lucifer, but he basically says that really religion is just a grasping for the transcendent and the beyond. They're all the same. And so what the New World Order needs is a religion that blends everybody into a blob. And so I think that I'm trying to think about how to integrate that with magic. I mean, I think that if magic is defined, as Arthur C. Clarke says, as a technology that goes beyond, the five senses or whatever, then I guess I don't have a problem with that definition. I mean, modern science and tech pretty much is magic. It's pretty much doing things that the ancient myths thought was magic. Like, I had to write a paper on Achilles' shield when I was doing my grad work, and his shield is like basically a TV screen. And the shield that he has, it has like the whole history of the Greeks being played out on the shield. And so it's weird because it's like he was presenting. I mean, I don't think he was really talking about TV screens, but he was telling it as if you could watch the history of the Greeks being played out in a circular pattern on his shield.
Right.
And there's a lot of analysis of the Lord of the Rings too, that the circle of the ring is about time and space. Anyway, it gets really deep, but I think that, yeah, so Clarke, the reason he said that is because in novels like Childhood's End, the technology that the aliens bring is basically like magic. In 3001, it's basically magic. Like what Howman can do as a deified being is basically magic. There was one other thing that Clarke talked about that I was going to say was magic, but I can't think of what it was. Anyway, I mean, I agree with you that it is.
Well, and I would argue that a lot of the magical worldviews are Neoplatonic because it had to do with theurgy, Hermeticism, mentalism to different degrees, but everything was getting back to the one. And so you've talked about Plato with the sort of technocracy and this emphasis, as Tristan was talking about, equality. It's like this man-made unity physically is tied to somehow there's some transcendence as well. There's a weird spiritual interconnection with all this stuff.
So I think that so a lot of the church fathers, obviously Dionysius, Maximus, pulled true elements out of Neoplatonism. The Logi doctrine is mentioned by Neoplatonists, but there's this assumption in the Neoplatonists that if we can return to that primordial unity, that's somehow better. Like the state that we're in is the result of some schism or some diminished status of refraction from the one.
Right.
So the further that you get into the many, the further you are away in a diminished status from the one. So you got to get back to that. And one thing that Christianity does is that it doesn't make multiplicity evil.
Right.
Right. Because of the balance between the one and the many. But also in St. Maximus, there's the overcoming of the dialectic between stasis and change. So the Eastern Fathers say that in the eschaton, we will forever be moving up into God. They call it ever moving stasis. So, and all that's intended to signify is that people like Origen were wrong to assume that Christianity was a cloak for Neoplatonism, that change was bad, that we had to get back to pure unity or something like that.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with beings having their own wills, ability to will multiple goods. Neoplatonists, Origenists, they would see that as insane.
Right.
Like how the good can only be one, the will can only be one, you can only will one thing. It's just bad theology based on Hellenic assumptions. And by the way, a lot of the Far Eastern religions have the same assumptions of, as you know, a higher primacy to some sort of generic unity.
Right.
But why? On what basis is that the case? And in the Trinity, there is an order. There's a hierarchy of order, but not in ontological status, right? The Father doesn't have more essence or powers than the Son or the Spirit,
right?
Even though the Father's first, right? There's no metaphysical primacy that he has where the Son is diminished. So that's a unique answer that Christianity has. But I did want to say, too, that I think that Tolkien and Lewis also are consistently utilizing and pulling ways that are insightful and useful, much like Maximus did for philosophy and theology. Because, for example, in Tolkien's universe, the creator creates from the mind. Like he gives conception to time and space and to the angelic beings,
right?
Which, I mean, they have their own name in the Tolkien universe, but it's basically creation from the mind. In Lewis's Narnia, Aslan sings the universe into existence, which is, again, a Neoplatonic idea of like the celestial spheres, that they resonate at certain notes, musical notes. This gets into like the quadrivium and all that. But by the way, that's in Tolkien too, that the angelic hierarchy that Iluvatar creates also helps sing the order into, like, so the universe is created like in Genesis, but it doesn't have form and order yet. And so the singing, like cymatics, produces the form. So the structures come together through the act, not just of word. It is the word. It's a logos kind of creation theology, but it's a sung creation theology, which I think is kind of biblical in the sense that, like, we know that Lucifer, according to Ezekiel, was in some way a musical being, right?
Yeah, look at the liturgy. It's like everyone sings together in unison, right? The angels cry, "Holy, holy, holy art thou, God."
But I knew that Lewis had that in Narnia, because if you read the prequel, Magician's Nephew, that's how Aslan creates creates Narnia. But in Tolkien, I didn't know that Iluvatar has creates on the basis of the divine mind, and then he and the angels like sing form into existence. Pretty crazy.
Well, it's interesting, like when Billington gets into a lot of the revolutionaries, they would venerate Prometheus, but then they also venerated Pythagoras as like the preeminent first communist. He was the first revolutionary, Pythagoras, and this idea of the music of the spheres and geometry being created through music, and then also music being used in a ritual way plays a large it's an important aspect of the revolutionaries' worldview, in that bringing about a new music. And you look at the music of like even like Wagner, right? You look at this music that's supposed to incite the passions, and that it's supposed to arouse you in certain ways and bring you to action. There's certain types of music that have been played in situations and it started riots because people had never heard this type of stuff before. They would literally go mad when they heard this type of music. And then, you know, music and technology, you see the binaural beat stuff now, where it's like, we're going to brainwave and train you. And then while they're building this hive mind, building this AI system to monitor your reactions, actions, thoughts, watching your eyes scan ads, ultimately the idea is to have the mobile devices surveilling us constantly, as Jay has broken down in Jacques Attali's book. Like the surveillance devices will monitor you, and music and frequency. You see this with the idea of millimeter waves being used for mind control purposes and stuff. Like you see the technocrats have this idea of music, and then bringing it back to the French Revolution also. Well, maybe this is something we can talk about next, but the idea of like the scientific device as a bringer of enlightenment, and also as a bringer of oblivion. And the guillotine is named after a scientist, a doctor who invented it, Dr. Guillotin. And he wanted to democratize human capital punishment, ultimately human sacrifice. And the guillotine was a scientific device used within a ritual setting for the revolutionaries' purpose of bringing in the great new society. Right. And they would plant trees of liberty, they called them, and have these feasts commemorating reason and logic. Right. And these public executions using the scientific human sacrifice ritual magic device of the guillotine that became the primary sigil and image of the revolution as well. And that the guillotine is scientism and oblivion all kind of wrapped up in one symbol.
Separating the head from the body. Right, it's symbolically doing just as Jay was talking about with the C.S. Lewis novel.
There's a funny dialogue. Y'all ever read Ion, the dialogue of Plato?
Carl Jung. Yeah.
No, Ion, the dialogue of Plato.
Oh, no.
It's really short. You should read it. It's funny because Socrates gets into debate with a poet, Ion, and it's about music and poetry and whether they are of divine inspiration. And Socrates is asking him, like, so where do you get your inspiration? And he's like, well, my muse. And Socrates is like, oh, so basically you're possessed. Yeah. And he's like, well, yeah, I kind of get possessed, and then the inspiration comes out of me. So, well, he said, but you can't trust that because you're possessed. Right. So the whole dialogue is about how we can't let musicians and poets run the society because they're controlled by the passions and by spirits, and not by reason. So what's weird about that is just that it's funny because you get sometimes these bizarre strictures about the arts in Plato, where he's not a fan of the arts, right? He's not a fan of music, poetry, these kinds of things, because he thinks they can incite the passions and overthrow the society. which is kind of true, right? But it depends on what kind of art. Like Tristan was saying, like revolutionary music, rock and roll is revolutionary music, right?
Well, same with the Renaissance. I mean, that's when we see a new profound importance on the music and the passions and art as a way of decadence and a liberation.
Right. I don't know a lot about music. I mean, I'm not like a trained in music, but people like Pano knows all about like Byzantine tonation and how ordered and structured it is and how it matches up to like biblical symbology of like the eighth day. It gets really deep, and if you get into that kind of stuff. And I met a blind nun one time who did a presentation. Father Deacon was there at the Orthodox monastery in Texas. She did this whole presentation on Maximus's Logian music. It was amazing, but she was making the connection between how the universe is kind of like sung into existence, right? So it's not just words. I mean, it is words, the logos, the logi, those are the words of the logos. But they're kind of like sung. I can't prove this, but I've always just figured that there's got to be something to like the notes of this, and I know that's the Pythagorean view of reality, but I mean, about cymatics. I've seen you do, you talked about in your videos. There's definitely something to that, but what the answer is, I don't know.
Well, in regard to these sort of existential magical creations where like all the wishes come together, that is the quest for the Philosopher's Stone or the elixir of immortality, whether it be Taoist immortals or alchemists, European alchemists. So there's been this magical pursuit for omniscience and immortality, most specifically, and that's exactly what they promise through this technology, that whether you're going to upload your consciousness, whether you're going to be fully fused with the machine, there's a lot of different speculations, but we see in the psychedelic community, whether it's Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson, Terence McKenna, or now the contemporary psychonauts and Burning Man. It's all about, somehow realizing that you and I are illusions as we are, and we have to blend with this hive mind, which goes consistently with what Jay's saying, that the elites want, they're going to maintain their sort of personhood, if you will, but everybody else is going to be dissolved into this like faceless hive mind.
Yeah, I never understand how. I mean, like when you read Ray Kurzweil, like he's talking about how everybody's going to be connected to be a giant hive mind. Does he think that he's not going to be connected to the giant hive mind? I mean, in the other one, I'm not dissing that one. I mean, that one's really important too. But in the Singularity book, there's sections where he's talking about the dangers of when the nanotech is in your brain, that they'll be able to like step in between your external stimuli and your mind, and they'll be able to put before you whatever stimuli they dictate. Jeez. And I'm just like, do you want to live in that? I mean, so he thinks he's going to be like uploaded or resurrected in, the coming transhumanist aeon. I'm like, but they're not, they're going to be cool with you because you wrote this book. And it's just silly. Like the idea that I'm exempted from it, right, because I'm part of it or something like that, when revolutionaries always like just kill their own devotees right away.
Yeah, that's what you mentioned in the InfoWars video that you did on C.S. Lewis, is like, what do these people think is going to happen to them once the revolution's complete? They're going to be the first ones gone.
And that's a tendency of revolutionaries. Tristan, do you recall does that come up in, because it's a lot fresher?
Yeah, I was talking about this in the stream the other day of like Saint Just was this, the first one of the early social justice warrior. He was super pure, and he would, I don't want to be involved in any of these worldly things. I'm this like revolutionary ascetic, philosopher, poet, king, god man person. And he was like a total weirdo, creeper, coomer too. Like he seduced some chick that was really young. And he was into some gay stuff too. Like they all were like this homoerotic thing going on where they kicked all the girls out of the revolution because the women would incite the passions too much. And it became a very
INCEL revolution.
That's what I was thinking.
It became, they had the He-Man woman haters revolutionary club, and they all ended up killing each other. Like Saint Just, he went to the guillotine, right? Like Robespierre, all these revolutionaries who enacted the terror ended up as victims of the terror, right? I mean,
there's that famous painting too of Marat in the bath, and his wrist is slit, and he's like hanging out of the bathtub. You know what I'm talking about? Marat, Marat. He was one of the revolutionaries. And I'm trying to remember if he killed himself or if he was killed in the bathtub. But he was another one of these characters that they immortalized in this famous painting. If you just, it's a really, you'll notice it if you probably.
Well, they immortalize these people after they kill them, so they'll kill them, or they'll kill themselves because they know they're about to get guillotined and stuff, and they know, you know, that they're being inquired about. And then after the fact, they look back and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, like this guy was really cool. Like let's, you know, let's." They had a hagiography. They had their own lives of, you know, degenerate, demonic, revolutionary saints.
Well, there's a lot of symbolism in this painting too, because we deconstructed this painting when we were having that class. It's called The Death of Marat, and I thought he was in a bathtub, but I can't tell. You can't really tell what he's sitting in, but like he's got blood coming out of him, and he's got his little last thing that he wrote. And there's also supposedly like Masonic symbolism in the painting too. So, but he's another one of these characters that wasn't revolutionary enough, and I think he ended up dead. So,
well, it's so
yeah, he was killed. Yeah, I'm correct. He was killed.
It's ironic from a Christian perspective, where, you know, ours is highly moralistic. We follow Christ, and through death, we actually live eternally. They're so afraid of death, yet they're still pursuing like eternal life. It's on the opposite end of the spectrum, and so their pursuit for eternal life is a death cult. It's killing everything on its way there, which is so ironic compared to us. That is, you know, it's through death that we sort of escape into eternity.
Little side note, there's a really good talk by Kerry Bolton, and I don't agree with all of Kerry Bolton's views per se, but he is a pretty good historian of this stuff, and he wrote a book on the revolutionaries. I'll have to see if I can find that podcast that he did, but he went through this the psychology of each one of these characters and just talk about how crazy they were. Like,
if you find that, send that to me. If you,
yeah, I mean, these guys were all just complete nuts, man, like literal loons.
And this is what the fire in the minds of men. It's like they're insane, and they're obsessed with like Pythagoras, and they all think that they're going to be gods. Like I was looking for the quote about, we were talking a minute ago about music, and the revolutionaries, they really did. They saw music as something magical, right? So the music of the spheres was the highest form of discourse, expressing the harmony of creation, or rather of the world as it should be. The occultist Antoine Fabre de Lovett who composed all manner of fantastic works in the revolutionary era, climaxing in his golden verses of Pythagoras, left behind a posthumous work that proclaimed music as the science of harmonic relationships of the universe. So then he talks about the belief in the liberating power of music derived from the occult fascination of the Pythagorean pioneers of the revolutionary tradition with discovering the lost harmony of nature. And there's truth to it, right? That the harmony of nature and the, you know, music inciting feeling, emotion, activity, which comes from the feeling and the motion and movement of the will. But it can cut both ways. Music can be beautiful and directed towards worship of God, or music can be base, as you see with, you know, what the music of pop culture today, where it's directed towards inciting passions, violence.
Unless it's new hot singles like Pay Piggy, which is not.
I know. Well, then that's like transcends. You know, there's the transcendent, the beautiful and sublime music of Jay Dyer's R&B, his bustling R&B career.
It's a summer classic.
Are you just trying to incite me to jealousy of your musical talent?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know why you like right in front of all this audience.
That is my number one. I have a whiteboard over there, and it has number one mission at the top: incite Tristana to jealousy.
Dang, dude, I feel.
By the way, I forgot to mention the two things. Mm-hmm. So, looking at the assassination of Marat, this is funny. This illustrates Tristan's point. So Jean-Paul Marat was one of the leaders of the Montagnards, which was a radical faction that would be like a radical Jacobin during the Reign of Terror up to the Thermidorian reaction. Marat was stabbed to death in his bath, I guess, by Charlotte Corday, who was a Girondin enemy of Marat and blamed Marat for the September massacre. Corday was then later tried and executed by revolutionaries. So they just kill it. Like she kills him, and then they kill her. Like it's like kill. It's just nuts, man. These people are insane. Because you can never be revolutionary enough, right? And that's one of the epithets, or one of the phrases of the Frankfurt School is like to critique the critique. You must always be critiquing the previous generation, because the revolution never ends. Right. I think Lenin said it's a never-ending revolution. There is no
end. It was a perpetual revolution. But I think maybe Buonarroti believed in that as well.
Probably.
But like, I don't think Lenin, because it seems like Lenin, he piecemealed all of his worldview from previous revolutionaries. I mean, all these guys did. There was like there was like an apostolic succession of demonic revolutionary beliefs that kind of get passed down and recycled. But then they all act like they're the original, like this is my idea. I'm the literary genius.
Lenin has a little book though about the empirico-critical method or something like that, and it's basically about how, since he's a radical materialist, matter is always in flux. The revolution must express dialectical materialism, which is never-ending revolution.
Yeah, is that what must be done, which was named after like the novel by Chernyshevsky? It might have been, because Chernyshevsky's novel was what like Dostoevsky's critiquing in the Notes from the Underground, and that novel talks about building the Crystal Palace, right? So the Crystal Palace, which is like the British display in, I forget which year. But it's this artificial creation made out of glass and steel, and it's this giant geometrical kind of just Masonic ode to the human will and transcendence.
So
and then how do you, when you build the Crystal Palace, what are you going to do? Well, you then the revolutionaries tear it down and build it again. So it's like this never-ending destruction.
The theory of permanent revolution. Okay, so Lenin was a big fan of it, but apparently Bukharin wrote the book, The Theory of Permanent Revolution. So he was another one of those later.
Because permanent revolution is really just progressivism. It's through revolution which we get the progress, and progress needs friction. It needs death. It needs, ultimately from a spiritual perspective, it needs sacrifice.
Yeah. And then that sacrifice gets exalted as, it's this hypnotic thing as well. Like the human sacrifice ritual, you see it, it's a mass hypnosis and a mass trauma ritual. And what you saw with the guillotine, which is this mass trauma ritual using the instrument of science and reason and humane slaughter of man. They started making, by the end of the terror, this is from Fire in the Minds of Men, by the end of the terror, children were given toy guillotines and sparrows for practice executions. So they could make, they could decorate their little revolutionary icon corners, with their guillotine Funko Pops, right? So I know Jay's a big fan of the Funko Pops. You get the Robespierre Funko Pop with the Elon Musk guillotine. The Dr. Guillotine
come out with a Funko Pop that it's also a smell, Funko smell. It has gamer ass smell.
Called a funk ass pop.
Funk ass pop, exactly.
So what do you? I kind of see the whole transgenderism, transhumanism, androgyny thing. You look at some of these Gnostic groups like the Knights Templar. They worship Baphomet, which is again this image of the androgyny, which, as Jay was highlighting, it's like this again, that Neoplatonic oneness, getting back to the oneness. By the way, remember that the mythology of the Templars is that supposedly they were worshiping a disembodied head, the head of John the Baptist or something like that, right? Or a goat head or a cat head, something like that. I think Lewis was playing on that. And in the novel too, I forgot to mention, he also says that, which Jamie had a good point, that she was like, well, I think he's referencing Baphomet, which makes sense because Lewis would know about that Templar story. But the head says, quote, let me see, I think I wrote this down. Something like, let's see. Gender must be destroyed and overcome because sexuality is evil, being an aspect of biology. And since biology is evil and must be overcome, gender has to be destroyed. Right.
That was fascinating.
And Tristan, you've done a lot of videos talking about how they're literally transitioning us in a way through the food. Like the attack on our hormones, testosterone, all this different stuff, all the soy food. This is another technique, another technology in this sort of revolutionary spirit.
Right, right. I mean, and just a dismembering of the genetics of the food supply as well, right? This breaking down, and we'll just take a piece of a fish gene and put it in a tomato, a piece of this, a piece of that, and it's really, I mean, it's man playing God, right? And what Jay talked about earlier when with Arthur C. Clarke's book, Childhood's End, which I've seen clips from like the series.
That series is pretty good. I would recommend it. Yeah,
I'll have to check it out.
I mean, so the eschaton of just complete destruction and of pulling the children out and then cutting off the head of the household, the parents, and destroying the parents, and then rebuilding society. The children belong to the state. This was another thing that the revolutionaries were into. You see this in Dostoevsky's Demons. Mm-hmm. They talk about, well, you got to get rid of families. The children have to be raised by the state for a certain amount of time, for 5 years or so, and then you can bring in you give them to the families. But everyone belongs to everyone, and everyone's surveilling everyone. And then I was thinking about the disembodied head imagery, and like one of the probably the greatest work of literature, fiction, and film ever, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, right? Who do you have there? Zordon, right? No, I'm just kidding, joke, but no.
Yeah, so you can see the sort of, like you said, the head of the family. I mean, the attack on masculinity, the attack on the father. It's the guillotine over again, the separation of the head from the body. I see it all as this continual war against God. It is the eternal revolution, as somebody in the chat said, of Satan against God, the recapitulation of the Luciferian fall, which is ultimately the worship of self, which is mostly done, again, through the worship of one's own reason, which is how the elites sort of go about it.
Yeah, I mean, they enthroned reason as the goddess in Notre Dame when they stormed the cathedral, and the story was they put a whore on the altar and said she was the goddess reason,
which is an exact inversion again of Mary herself. So we see them bringing in their utopia is the inversion of the New Jerusalem.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird that they always have to, why are they so obsessed with Christianity? You know what I mean? Like, why? What about all the other religions, right? I mean, supposedly revolutionists, we don't like any religion, but they really seem to hate Christianity. Why is that?
Right.
Why is that the one that's the most, and the answer is because that's the one that's wholesome, right? It's the one that, has the 10 Commandments, right?
Right. It's the truth. It's the literal.
Yeah, exactly.
It is the actual truth. And, I'm curious, Jay, how do you kind of see this whole Russian-Ukrainian thing playing itself out in regards to this next step of the Great Reset? I mean, in regards to, it seems like it's the ideal opportunity to launder money from the West to, again, the same power families, part of this Great Reset, part of this agenda, and move the world faster and faster to digital currencies.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what's going on in Ukraine in the sense of like what the long-term plan is.
Generally,
I've speculated that probably if they do roll out like the economic collapse or food shortage or cyber polygon, that it would be blamed on the events of Ukraine. Which would be a scapegoat for the people who run the West actually doing it. That seems like a plausible scenario that they could roll out.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, but maybe it'll lead to World War III. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, nobody ultimately knows. I was just curious how you kind of saw this fitting into, a deliberate plan. I've been kind of speculating what's this whole thing with the Roe vs. Wade, the overturning? It seems like this is a deliberate plan just to change the narrative for the 2022 election, and it's they could have done this anytime, but why now? Why is it all happening now?
I think they want to try to rile people up. I think that there's a good chance we might see some staged events blamed on, conservative so-called right-wingers. That's very plausible.
Yeah, I saw a G.K. Chesterton quote about how abortion is the inversion of the Eucharist. It's an attack on the body. It's an attack on life, and that he saw this as a sort of I think the quote described it as a sort of satanic Eucharist. And it's so wild to see how crazy these women.
The Satanists call it a sacrament.
Yeah. The Church of Satan literally talks about how it's a sacrament, and other traditions. And so it's just it's mind blowing to see. I've watched a video in front of a Catholic church. There was some men out there praying the rosary, and some woman had like fake baby dolls in her shirt, pulling them out and like pulling the baby dolls apart, talking about how I'm killing my baby, and it's like literally in front of a Catholic church, and probably 20 men out in front praying the rosary, and it's like, wow, how do people not see the spiritual levels of this whole thing and what's going on right now? And again, why do they hate the Christians so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think isn't Islam kind of technically pro-life? I don't know everything about Islam, but
right.
Like, where's the rage and anger at Islam? Or I mean, I'm sure there's other pro-life
other
religions out there.
That'd be pro-life. Yeah, it's quite eye-opening, and so as I told Tristan when we were on a previous stream before, that it seems like 2020, again, as a sort of tongue-in-cheek, but just symbolically speaking, we talk about 2020 vision, but all the sort of threads of history come together in 2020, that when you look back, whether it be the Carol Quigley stuff or, Jekyll Island or all these different rabbit holes that you go down, it all kind of comes together in 2020 where it all just makes sense. And now the people who have put those dots together, everything we say just keeps on falling into place. Same thing with the jabbies and what we thought was going to happen and how that's now playing itself out, where the kids, all the kids have liver problems now. How'd that happen?
I think delusion is the best answer. People are under a strong delusion. I think a lot of people are super scared. They feel like they deep down know a lot of the stuff that we talk about is the case. I mean, one thing I was pointing out was that everybody loves C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, like most people, right? Oh, I love Lord of the Rings, I love Narnia. And I've just been pointing out now, like, well, you realize that everything you hear me talk about, they talked about. Like, that's my big revelation of the last week or two, is like, how is any of this crazy or outlandish when literally their stories are explicitly intended to expose the very thing that we talk about. Right. So, I mean, and if people can't, if they're not going to wake up at that point, I mean, the sad part about it is that you get what you choose, I guess is a way to put it. Right. If you choose delusion, if you choose to go along with a lie, I mean, that's what Second Thessalonians says, that you get what you've chosen. Like the punishment is being given over to the delusion. And you will believe that you're going to get immortality and a coon pod and universal basic income and all you're going to get is death.
Right. Which again that's only the Orthodox faith is going to have the theology of these energies and how all this stuff relates to an actual process we're all participating in, that as we actually believe in Christ, move in that direction, become filled with those energies, again, he's the way, the truth, and then you get eternal life through that process. Everything, all these things, like my own journey, and that's what's so funny about this stream is I was listening to you guys before I was Orthodox. I'd gone to a few churches. I had been interested in that stuff. I was still had a full foot in the whole psychedelic thing, but listening to you guys talking about the Tavistock, and that's when I heard you, Jay, go down the MK Ultra stuff, and that forced me to go a little bit deeper than what I was familiar with. And now I see this picture so much better than I did 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but becoming Orthodox, becoming Christian is what puts so much of this stuff in its right context to even understand it. And it seems like that is then this phenomenon, whether it's the online Orthodox community or all of our different followers, it's like there's a real thing. We can feel the energy. Online Orthodoxy, just look how influential online Orthodoxy is compared to the numbers. It's like 1% of the U.S. population, and yet in regards to online Christianity, it has such a strong presence. It's like if you're a true seeker of truth, as you go down that path, everything begins to fall in place. And I'm just curious, like, how did that, is that true and consistent with your guys' own journeys? into orthodoxy. I mean, now you guys are both promoting. I got into orthodoxy from a lot of your videos, Jay, and I know Tristan. We've had a lot of private conversations about the faith and trying to live this whole thing. So I'm curious, is that also true for you? Is the more you go down this orthodox journey, it's like everything, the theology itself, the paradigm itself, the frontum itself helps put everything into its own proper perspective?
Yeah, I don't see how else to make sense of all of this without that. I mean, what's the other worldview that we would go to that would give an account for all this stuff?
Can't. I mean,
Francis. I mean, that doesn't work.
Right.
Tristan, what do you think?
Sorry, I was just falling asleep.
When I start talking,
you guys just bore me so. No,
I
was thinking about the question before and the new question, right? Like, I mean, there's really good questions, and what all happened in 2020, and like with the world just going nuts. Right?
Even with Trump, like Trump was exposed in 2020, right? Now it's like the Trump. I saw his campaigns promoting Dr.
The idols
Oz.
crumbled.
Yeah, Dr. Oz, who's clearly tied with the World Economic Forum. So we see like the whole thing was a false opposite. The whole thing is again another.
People are looking for these political solutions, right? They want the political solutions. They want the worldly solutions, and they don't even want to identify the root of the problem. And the root of the problem isn't like, oh, we got a few bad guys and they're creating this global conspiracy and they want to hurt you and make you sick. Well, these things happen, right? Yeah, there are people that conspire. There are things that happen, and groups plot against other groups. It's politics, right? And what the revolution's done is it's actually concretized and systematized a perpetual revolution. So I was also thinking about, when Jay brought up Lenin's idea of the perpetual revolution. Yeah, it's called democracy, right? Well, hey, you don't like it? 4 years, you vote him out, you get a new Trump, right? You can get your new based left-wing or right-wing candidate, and they're both going to, these political solutions are nonsensical because the system of revolution that we've set up and the republics and all this stuff, we are in a revolutionary system. Right. And, bringing it back to like, I think literature and story and like narrative, like what Jay and yourself do when in analyzing the world, and you bring the symbolic aspect of it into it, it's so important. And Dostoevsky's book Demons, right? He starts out the novel. It's a massive novel, and I highly recommend people get into it. It'll might take you months to read it. And if you're watching, might take you a month or two to read. I've been reading it for like a little bit over a month and a half, I think, just very slowly. But the way it starts, it really it brings it full circle. It starts out with this poem from Pushkin called Demons. And the poem goes, "Upon my life, the tracks have vanished. We've lost our way. What shall we do? It must be a demon's leading us this way and that around the fields. How many are there? Where have they flown to? Why do they sing so plaintively? Are they burying some household goblin? Is it some witch's wedding day?" I mean, it starts with this poem, which is, about demons clearly, and about people being influenced by the demonic. And then the next quote on the first page before the introduction of the book starts is from Luke chapter 8. Right. Now a large herd of swine was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he let them leave. So he gave them leave. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting on the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how he who had been possessed with demons was healed. So, I mean, that's what it is. It's Christ, right? It's you're not going to get it by. We're not going to get out of this by joining the demonic dance of revolutionary scientism and reorder the world with our own will and our own reason. It's Christ that casts the demons out of the man, and those demons go into the herd of swine. And where does the herd of swine go? It falls into the lake. They go into the abyss. They go into death and destruction. And that's those are the options: either Christ or death and destruction.
Yeah. Every time in Scripture somebody's possessed, they either attempt or commit suicide. So Saul, Judas, and the guy that tries to throw himself into the fire.
Mm-hmm.
So demonic, acquiescing to the demonic is intentional suicide, self-destruction.
And it makes us like an animal. So even that the metaphor, or not metaphor, the literal reality of Satan taking Legion, putting them in the swine, it's demons themselves make us animalistic. And last night, talking with Rachel Wilson, she had an article on transhumanism, MK Ultra, and what's called Bambi sleep, and what's called sissy hypnoporn, where there's this prevalent thing I had no idea about, where these porn hubs and all these major porn sites have this genre that is incredibly popular of men watching videos that have binaural beats and all these sounds, mantras inside, to hypnotize them to think that they are women. And it's called Bambi sleep. And
okay, Tristan's been talking about being in this.
Dude, I don't know. I have any idea what you're talking about. I've never heard of this. I've never been involved. Why are you saying this? Why are you bringing this up? I have no involvement in this at all. Like, I've never even heard of this. What you keep talking about this, and you keep saying like why I'm supposed to know about this. What is your problem? Why are you telling me this? I don't know.
But no, I don't know. In her research, it showed that the vast majority of these people, like, they literally, once they get hypnotized to turn into the opposite, they want to become a bimbo chick, and it has to do with these concepts of being dominated, that their whole mental processes regress to the point where they can't even use the restroom without a trigger, for the hypnosis triggers, and that they literally become like vegetables, they become animals. And then again, it's like what it's doing is just opening people up to possession, using the binaural beats and the hypnotization and opening up the mind, to that whole reality.
What do you mean they can't even use the bathroom? I'm confused. What do you mean?
Like, I don't know. Like, why are you asking me?
Well, then the article is talking about, like, they literally have trouble defecating or using the restrooms because it's tied to their sexual parts of, their thing or their anus, which is used sexually, and it's tied to all these sort of mental triggers due to the hypnosis. Because the thing that it was talking about is how the anus is like the universal vagina, the universal vulva, and how they want to make this thing. And I kept thinking then about the black hole, the science, the multiverse, like the idea that the anus is like the gateway to equality. That it's the gateway to, and so everybody can then be sexually
it's like the gateway to equality, and that everybody can be defiled and destroyed through
which is
it.
It's a demonic possessive process.
And just like the guy's like, if everyone would kill themselves, we'll all be God, and God doesn't exist because everyone hasn't killed themselves yet. Wow.
Right.
Well, some of the magic traditions believe that that's a portal. The anus is a magic portal, right?
Well, Aleister Crowley was his sex magic advocated for all male magicians, again, and it's tied to transcending boundaries. That if you're limited by, I'd never let a man sodomize me. Then you're not as magically powerful.
Why are you being a bigot, bro?
Yeah, you're not as magically powerful, and so you need to have that done to you so that there is no limitation that you're held by, and therefore you're infinite. And that's exactly what we see through this technomagic. It's like this process coming. And so you see the androgyny, the transhumanism, the homoeroticism, and these sort of sterile forms of sexuality. So, anyways, guys.
It's just defilement, right? Yeah. I mean, it all comes defilement and destruction. And that's what the demonic wants you to do. And then when you look at what they're selling you on, we'll upload you to the cloud. You can live 150 years or live forever. You just have to leave your body. You just have to leave your body. Well, we promise you, we're going to put you into the Neuralink cloud.
Which is the guillotine again, right? It's the guillotine.
Yeah, and it's the herd of swine running into the abyss. But then the only answer is Christ, right? That's who brings us out. That's who has actual power to give life. And it's our choice, right? We can't just, it's not just like a one-time switched on thing either, where, I said Jesus, I said the magic words, I said I like Jesus or whatever, so now I'm saying, no, it's like it's communion with God, the eternal union.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the Eucharist is like the that's the true sort of philosopher. What they're trying to create with this technology, this philosopher's zone, somehow some type of material thing that they're going to be able to connect with divinity. I mean, that is, as an Orthodox Christian, that is the Eucharist. That is what that whole process is fulfilling. So, anyways, guys, go ahead, Jay. Go ahead.
There was one other point I forgot.
Yeah,
I had it pulled up and I just remembered it. When we were talking about Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, I forgot that. So the ring, as everybody knows, makes you invisible, and that's in Plato's Republic. There's a story in the Republic about the Ring of Gyges, which the person who wears it can be invisible. And then the question arises, well, would these people maintain their virtue if they had that power? So the ring represents like godlike powers, and if we had that kind of power, that's why I think Tolkien uses it as a symbol of technology, because if Lord of the Rings is about the warning of the technocracy and all that stuff, and if that's what Sauron wants, right, to not just because when he gets the ring, he can be embodied and he can also have all these powers and to be able to destroy Middle Earth. So it represents, basically power beyond the limitations of time and space, right. Which is the whole. All I'm going to say is just this, which is that. So in Plato, it's kind of mysterious and people debate exactly why he brings it in. Clearly, it's at one level an obvious device. It's a device for a moral tale. Like he's trying to show that virtue isn't a social construct, because he's raising these questions about, well, what if there was a ring that would make you invisible? Would people still choose the just actions if they had that power, or would they be invisible and then go rape and steal and do whatever they could because they get away with it, right? Tolkien is appropriating that for, I think, a symbol of technology and the power of tech to give you godlike powers, magic tech.
Solomon's literally using magic even to create the new type of orcs, as you said, sort of gene editing, the sort of CRISPR. Right there, you see it in the new type of orc soldier. So Lewis's story is, Tolkien's story is a warning because the ring corrupts the person that is obsessed with it. Right.
So he would be saying, I think, to Arthur C. Clarke, what you are introducing will not bring about a utopia or the apotheosis of man. It'll bring about the destruction of man. And Arthur C. Clarke, in response to Tolkien, would say, no, technology is God. Right. It will save us.
Right.
So
that's the contrast here. Yeah. And I think the ring, too, is a perfect symbol, because Tristan and I were talking before the stream started about fire in the minds of men, and he was talking about the revolutionaries. And maybe you want to speak more to this, Tristan, about the circle with the dot, which is, again, when you describe the Neoplatonic paradigm, it's the dot, the one, and then the first emanation, the second emanation, the third emanation. And so the revolutionaries use the dot and the circle, which is, again, the whole point of this existentialist, this Gnostic impulse to get back to the center, get back to the one, which really is then the ring of power. It is the ring. It is the circle. And it is, as you talked about in your video, Jay, the Ouroboros. It's self-destructive at the same time.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking about when you're talking about the ringer, right? The revolutionary circles, the concentric circles, which is like this, the holographic image for, the hierarchy of conspirators. When the Illuminists use this too, like Weishaupt really like this, and they would use the point in the middle of the circle as a glyph when they're in their correspondences talking about the revolutionary groups. And then even Dostoevsky knew this because he was a part of the Petrushevsky Circle, which was a group of initiates into this revolutionary group who were looking to create an armed revolt, armed uprising within Russia. 60 members were arrested, and Dostoevsky ultimately did like 6 years of hard labor, 10 years of exile. During this time period, he had a great repentance and a turning away from the revolutionary atheist nihilist worldview and became an Orthodox Christian. And so the Petrushevsky Circle, that's alluded to in the book Demons by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and Pyotr Stepanovich is creating these circles, and the idea of the 5-man circle that goes back to this Pythagorean kind of magical number idea, right? Like the prime numbers 1, 3, 5, 7 being, especially number 5, I think it was, a lot of the revolutionaries thought that these have great power, and the world is going to be changed by the power of the number 17 was another idea that in Fire in the Minds of Men, one of these revolutionaries is like, 17 is the number that's going to change everything. It's going to bring down the whole order. And it's like really strange thinking, but also there's this you see this reflected in their actions. So, the central circle of initiates, the core circle being, 5 people in these certain areas. And then you're having outer circles of useful idiots and of liberals who you just gaslight and say, you're not liberal enough. You're not liberal enough. Go further, go faster, go further. There's an idea that Pyotr Stepanovich talks about in the book there. And then, of course, the music of the spheres, right? The circle, the Masons obsessed with squaring the circle. Right. And so, you see like in sport these days, in the boxing ring, they call it the squared circle. So yeah, you see this reflected throughout culture and throughout subversive movements. And that, yeah, it's fascinating how, I never thought of, Lord of the Rings, right? You becoming invisible, you put the ring on, and you transferring your body into a different realm, making your body a vessel for something else by joining yourself to the ring, to the circle, the circle of initiates, the inner circle. This is all language that came out of Weishaupt and his group, the Luminists. They had the inner circle. Babeuf had his conspiracy of equals, and it was based on the same Luminist model as well. So yeah, that's a really, really good point.
There's also a short story real quick by Arthur C. Clarke that we happened upon. I forgot about in this weird little book I found, Other Worlds, Other Gods. It's just an anthology of a bunch of goofy sci-fi stories. And the artwork on the front has this weird, creepy robot Jesus. I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but obviously they put that on the front on purpose. Mockery. Yep. Right. And then the story, Arthur C. Clarke's story in here is called The 9 Billion Names of God. And it's really weird. It's really short. It's about 6 or 7 pages. And it's basically just these computer scientists are trying to input all these symbols into a computer to try to solve some giant algorithm at the same time as a bunch of llamas are writing what's supposed to be the last of the sacred symbols before the world ends. And so they start putting the llama symbols into this supercomputer, and it's supposed to solve some big cosmic algorithm. And then it ends with they're about to leave the Tibetan monastery, and the stars start to collapse. So the world ends. Wow. So basically, the irony of that is that he's not an atheistic materialist. He's a Luciferian, right? I mean, He was hanging out with Crowley. His stories are all 100% Gnostic, Luciferian transhumanism, especially 3001. Here he's trying to import this Eastern Tibetan stuff. Isn't it deep? Isn't it mystical? And he says the article is about, it's critiquing Western materialism and everybody's so attached to their possessions and this kind of stuff. But the story is absurd because it's basically positing that there's some, giant gematria code to all of reality that computer science, the height of rationalism, and Tibetan Lama mysticism will converge at the end of the world, and that will, when the two merge, it will be the end of the world. Right. So he's got just this goofy kind of end times philosophy that attempts to re-inject Eastern mysticism into a Western rationalism, which he thinks is this higher third tier position, right? Well, but it's just he's just a con man.
It's so funny that he uses Tibetan Buddhism because that's a very theurgic form of Buddhism. It's almost considered sort of left-hand path of Buddhism. Yeah. They're doing rituals. They're doing magic. They have all types of gods and demons and spirits that they deal with. And so you saw the Nazis very interested in what was going in Tibet. Not so much all these other forms of Buddhism. Right. It's Tibetan Buddhism specifically. It's magical. It's a mixture with the Bon shamanism, the Bon people of the Tibetan area.
You should you would probably know more and get more out of the story than I would. It's only about 6 pages. You should read it. It's called The 9 Billion Names of God.
Yeah, let me pull it up.
It's a weird little thing that he wrote.
I found the passage about it was Bonneville. So Bonneville had begun the fad on the left, suggesting even before the revolution that the number 17 held the key to understanding the Jesuits' secret takeover of Masonry. The number 17. Bonneville believed that the Jesuits.
So Eddie Bravo brought this up last night.
Are you kidding me? That Bonneville? No. That's wild. I wonder.
Well, he said, "What do you think about the idea that?" And I don't remember who he mentioned, but he's like, was there an attempt by Jesuits to infiltrate Freemasonry? I said, I've heard there are people that think that.
Right. I've heard that.
And isn't this interesting?
I
wonder if they make the connection because Weishaupt was trained by Jesuits and then his organization ended up.
Right.
I don't know, maybe that's why they say that, but I mean, it's just, it came out of nowhere. It's a funny one. Bonneville believed this. Like,
so there is
1797. This was the year that he said this, I guess.
No, he's one of the revolutionaries, though, right?
Yeah. Bonneville, major revolutionary figure. He was in the Pythagorean stuff. Okay. He said that central prime numbers of Pythagorean mysticism 1, 3, 7, and above all 5 had the secret inner truths of the universe. And then pamphleteers of the right suggested that prime numbers provided a secret organizational code for revolutionaries. And then it talks about how Masonry in the 1770s and 80s had the increasingly manic search for simple geometric harmonies within Masonry in the 70s and 80s, the 1770s and 1780s, reveals the radical thirst for revolutionary simplification at its purest. So I don't know. I guess maybe during the 1770s and 80s was when this idea started floating around about the Jesuits infiltrating.
No, I think there is some truth to that because the Jesuits were intended to serve as kind of the intelligence agency right-hand man of the papacy. And if you look at Ignatius Loyola's origins, he was actually a part of an occult society before he became supposedly a devout Christian. He was part of the Illuminados, which was a Spanish mystical. Yeah, he was part of a Spanish mystical society that thought that they had like an inner illumination. And then when he converted, he said, well, what I could do for the church is basically take the model of what we did in terms of the Illuminados exercises and apply them to the church. And the Pope at that time, I mean, they were kind of in and out of favor with the papacy, but the Pope at that time was like, okay, yeah, you guys would be a good like right hand bunch of like assassins and a bunch of like, intelligence agents. And that's really what they functioned as for a while. And so I can absolutely believe, I'm not an expert on the Jesuits, but I've read a good bit about several books about their history, and they got up to some really weird stuff, man. There's as just one example to demonstrate this. I can't remember what country it is. It's somewhere in Europe, I think. You won't believe me, but I promise you this is true if we can dig it up. They had a cave where they did, I don't know what, but it's a specific Jesuit cave, and it's either like a chapel or a shrine or something. But when you go into the cave, my theory, I have a theory on this, is that they were with types of mind control. But they have cartoon drawings on the walls of the cave. Cartoons. And you'll like this, David, because it some of the artwork in the cave suggests that it's clearly kind of psychedelic art. If I recall, it's sort of like mushroomy kind of father mushroom characters. Or
okay.
Who am I thinking? Who's the fake Santa, the mushroom Santa? What's he called?
Just like Shaman Claus?
Yeah, like something like that.
Yeah.
There's really trippy artwork in this, and it's like 100 years old. This is like an old Jesuit cave.
Wow.
With trippy cartoon artwork on the wall.
And when you dive into R. Gordon Wasson and his wife's book, Russia, Mushrooms, and History, it talks about how out of the Western European nations, there's only 2 that have a linguistic connection to all, like, again, these ancient mushroom tribes, and it's French and Italian. And so the Germans, they don't have a real mushroom, or the English have these mushroom or psychedelic traditions. But in their work, according to R. Gordon Wasson and Valentina Pavlovna, the French and the Italians do have a history of these sort of secret mushroom pickings and inebriating groups. So that would be totally consistent with that. Again, being in France, a lot of the frescoes of the mushroom Christianity, they're all in France, they're all in northern Italy, or they're in southern Germany.
I found it, dude. You're not gonna believe this. I mean, this was like, it looks like Disney stuff.
What?
Yeah.
You pull it up.
Let me see. Yeah, I've got it right here.
Pull it up on screen.
It says, why are there underground Jesuit caves in Europe full of Egyptian, Islamic, and, by the way, cartoon artwork? And there's like stuff that looks like Disney. And I'm trying to figure out the date on this. I mean, this is some of the most bizarre stuff ever, but here you go. I'll send it to you. So, I mean, the Islamic stuff, it suggests to me that they were clearly involved in some kind of perennialism, because it's all very syncretistic, whatever is going on. Dutch, that's where it is. Dutch Jesuits.
This is good. I mean, even you see the symbolism back to Egypt, back to Zoroastrianism. All these different traditions had inebriating practices. Very interesting.
I mean, yeah, my suspicion, the Jesuits were experimenting with mind control, because if you and drugs, I mean, look at the Disney looking art of it looks like a Donald Duck and a bear and a dog serving dinner.
Here, I'll share this link with the live chat. No, that is really, really interesting stuff.
Now, you know, when I first heard you give your talk on, I know you're probably ready to go. I don't want to string this out, but good. So when I first heard you give your talk on,
just like Disney, dude.
Doesn't it? Exactly.
One,
yeah.
With like the little car and the bird, that looks.
Scroll
just
down
like
to the
Disney.
duck guy and the dog with the food.
Yeah, dude, you got Donald Duck in there. That's so weird. And then like the checkerboard floor throughout. I mean, if this was Jesuit, it's also very Masonic. You know, I mean,
yeah, it's clearly like a perennialist something going on here. I mean,
wow, yeah.
That's funny when you're talking about like Bonneville and these guys who got it really into Pythagoras, and then the ideas that they had of like, you know, the magic numbers. We're gonna, the number 17 is the secret to why the Jesuits took over the Masons. All these ideas, a lot of these, they do seem to indicate some sort of you know, either, you know, channeling or some sort. I mean, these ideas don't just come to you through like, oh, a little bit of science, a little bit of reason. There you go. Number 17 made the Jesuits take over the Freemasons, and now we got to kill everyone. You know, it's like these guys must have been engaging in some you know, Eleusinian mystery type stuff, and they're obsessed with Bonneville's obsessed with Pythagoras, right? And he says that Bonneville, even before the revolution, traced the Illuminist idea to Pythagoras, who brought from the Orient his system of true Masonic instruction to illuminate the Occident. Bonneville wrote verses on the numbers of Pythagoras, proclaiming that man is God and will become angelic by widening the circle of universal brotherhood. So it's like, that's Terence McKenna.
Again. Yeah.
That's Terence McKenna right there. Right. That's exactly what he believed. And then look, check this out. You're gonna love this. Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense and kind of kickstarted the American Revolution. Yep. He lived with Bonneville's wife and cucked Bonneville. And Bonneville said, yeah, that's cool. What? He named his son after Thomas Paine. He allowed his wife to travel to America to live with Thomas Paine for like 3 to 5 years. What? They were all into cuckoldry and weird relationships. And check it out. Thomas Paine, who lived in a menage a trois with Bonneville and his wife from 1797 to 1802, believed that the Druids and Pythagoreans had combined to provide an occult ideological alternative to Christianity. And an essay on the origin of Freemasonry, written after Thomas Paine's return to America with Bonneville's wife and immediately translated into French by Bonneville, insisted that the natural sun worship of the Druids had not been destroyed, but merely diverted into Masonry. So yeah, the perennialist circles of cuckoldry.
Wow. That is so on point. That is, yeah.
Well, the reason I was bringing up Father Mushroom or whatever he's called is because it comes up in the Northman, the movie that's out.
Oh, yep. All the Scandinavians were into the berserkers, where they would take amanita muscaria mushrooms, and then they go to war. Yeah. So they would get psychedelic state. So that's way more akin than with the Aztecs, where they would get inebriated on mushrooms, and they do human sacrifice.
The mushroom told me
that
Bonneville had to give his wife to Thomas Paine so that they can give birth to the revolution in America.
John Dee did the same thing with Edward Kelly. He gave Edward Kelly his wife to get to turn lead into gold. The final, again, they had the Philosopher's Stone, what they believed in the court of Rudolph II. He wanted them to turn lead into gold, and all the magic stopped working, the Enochian magic, and Edward Kelly convinced John Dee to give his young, beautiful British wife, who's like 25 years younger, to sleep with. And John Dee never, in his diary, he said it was the worst decision of his life because she was angry, she never got over it. He felt like he totally destroyed his marriage because he gave his wife to the con artist Edward Kelly. So you see the same cuckolding, the wife swapping, the sexual degeneracy, totally consistent with the magic, and then you see the technology and the technocratic elite. It's the same thing.
Yeah, and one can only speculate on what Payne and Bonneville were doing. With the, they're obsessed with the Pythagorean magic, the Illuminist type Freemasonry, illuminated Freemasonry, and then they, wife swaps. Who knows who their kids are? There is interesting stuff about like Bonneville's son. I think he named him after Thomas Paine too. So, who knows? Maybe you have some sort of, almost, Crowleyan moonchild nonsense that these goobers are getting. The mushroom told me that we was Vikings. We was all Vikings in the past, and we would take the mushrooms and do the rituals with the pee-pees.
Right.
So what, are you not a big movie fan, David?
No, I watch movies. I watch movies with my girlfriend. I'm just not, I'm not very versed in them, but I've been.
No, that's fine. I just was curious if do you think you'll watch The Northman?
No, I was wanting to. I watched pieces of your stream, and I was like, oh man, I definitely want to watch that.
Yeah, it's right up your alley because the mushrooms play a pretty important role in the story.
Yeah. Oh, do they really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I want to.
I won't tell you why, but yeah, you'll see. If you
I want to. Shoot, I watch that after this stream. But yeah, I do.
Well, I'm curious too because there's a specific figure, the main Viking dude. There's about 3 or 4 times where he encounters sort of otherworldly guides, and one of the figures I'm not sure who it's supposed to be, and I was going to get your analysis of that, but he's holding a head. He holds a head, it's the head of the guy who was the shaman for their tribe earlier in the movie. But I can't tell if he's like Odin or is he like pagan Father Christmas or whatever that character, whatever that character is supposed to be. I mean, I think you mentioned several names in because I went back and watched your stream on that. There's Orthodox, Saint Nicholas, but then there's pagan.
All types,
all these different ones,
all types,
right?
Yeah, Krampus. There's all types. The Russians have their own too. I forget the Russian name for that.
But this one seems to be associated clearly with seeing him on mushrooms,
right? Which was very consistent with the Scandinavians, particularly, and so it makes sense then with the Northmen, and that's why then you see in the German or the Scandinavian Christmas cards the red and white mushroom because there's still the remnants of their pagan origins.
Right.
Yeah, so it's so replete in our culture. And then the whole Mario thing. The technology is like again magically maliciously converting people's minds into reappropriating these substances as again these transcendent technologies. You can see it in the Mario stuff, and it's like, well, that stuff's ancients, and in France, all the different churches with the red and white mushroom, and then you have this Jesuit thing. Well, the book, The Immortality Key, the guy Brian Morescu, who's a lawyer, who again he's did a graduate degree at Columbia or something or Harvard in Greek and it was another language I forget. But he wrote the book, The Immortality Key, arguing that Christianity is a mushroom cult. This is the newest one. This is a very, very popular book. Well, he's Jesuit, and he was educated his entire life at Jesuit schools, and the book was promoted by the Jesuits.
When I was in college, we had a girl transfer in who had been trained, she bragged about this all the time, by these very prominent Jesuits. And I'm not joking, this chick believed the Egyptian pantheon view.
Right.
It's like she was tatted up with everything Egyptian. She was doing her grad work on Egyptology. Wow. And I'm like, so this is what the Jesuits taught you? And she's like, yeah. She's like, yeah, this is what they taught me.
And that's why I'm not surprised when you sent the thing and it was the Jesuits. Well, immediately in my mind, Brian Morescu, he talked about how, from middle school through high school, through college, I think he's still in close ties with his Jesuit mentors, and they read his book and talked about how good it was. And it's like, well, the whole thing, and it's the word concept fallacy is replete through that thing.
Yep. Exactly.
Because he's tying orthodoxy. There's no distinction between orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, and then Gnosticism. He uses what the Gospel of Thomas says is equal to then what the Seven Ecumenical Council says. It's like, whoa, dude, what are you talking about? Like he made the argument that when you die before you die, you don't die when you die, which is on Mount Athos. He equated that with the mushroom cults and the psychedelic cults of like ancient Eleusis. And it's like, dude, well, that has nothing. They're not the same. He's like, oh, well, this is referencing Persephone and death to Hades and the underworld. It's like, dude, that's a large, word concept fallacy. That's not even the same thing. It's not even the same paradigm. Well,
the Jesuits were really pioneers of that because their whole ethos was evangelism through enculturation. I mean, they obsessed over it. And I don't mean enculturation in the sense of like Innocent of Alaska. I mean, like they would try they came up with the idea of, well, we'll paint Jesus as Chinese Jesus, right? I mean, enculturation to the extreme to where it's just syncretism. Right. So they were the real
what did that lead to? It led to Pachamama is the Virgin Mary, right?
Right, exactly.
Where we are now.
Which is
it's a bait and switch. It's a bait and switch, yeah. Exactly.
Right. And you see the Pope with Chrislam becoming the sort of I don't even know how much. Maybe that'd be a whole nother topic, but I don't know. Like, well, how much power does the Pope have? At the same time, it looks like there's been a sort of fidelity by the imams in the Muslim world to the Vatican, but at the same time, he postures and prostrates before them, and so I don't know exactly. I know they have tons and tons of money, but he seems sort of like the new globo religious figure, the head of that, whatever that is. It's like now it's Pope Francis or the Vatican.
Could be. I mean, I think he would like that. Yeah, he wants to be the Petrine key holder of the world religions for sure.
So, well, guys, thank you so much for coming on here. This has been a really, really great stream and a lot of fun. And like I said, I was watching your guys' stuff back in 2018, 2019, and so it's a real honor to get both of you guys on here at the same time just to chat.
Thanks, dude.
About these topics. So there's a few super chats here. Again, if you guys need to go, feel free to bounce. I'm going to read them real quick. We'll get through them. Jessica Z throws in $5, and that's it. Thank you so much, Jessica Z. Truly, truly appreciate it. Joe Graves throws in $19.99 and says, simply because of this trio. Love you guys. Well, thank you so much, Joe Graves. God bless you. Bayes Lit Analyzer throws in $7.11. Shout out to Bayes Lit Analyzer. Jay, I don't know if you've checked out his channel. He's got some great stuff.
I watched all y'all's interviews. Yeah, I watched Tristan and you interview him. Yeah.
Bayes Lit Analyzer's great guy in the community. He says, awesome stream. Cotelians, Chad nerds, and bigots unite. Thanks, fellas. Well, thank you so much, Bayes Lit Analyzer. God bless you, brother. Go subscribe to his YouTube channel. Aaron Burrows throws in $1 with no comment. The Oreo Zone throws in $10 and says, thanks for all you do. The trifecta of Ortho Bros would never even consider taking Jesus seriously until y'all. So God bless. Well, thank you so much, The Oreo Zone. Glad that, again, you're taking orthodoxy serious. And again, and Jay, thanks for everything you do. And Tristan, I mean, you guys were monumental in my own journey.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I follow your content, watch it pretty regularly. So,
well, thanks, brother.
Appreciate that. Tristan doesn't know much about manners. I mean, he just kind of like walks off right when people are talking to him. But
I found the ring and I put it on.
So
is that what that was?
Yeah. I was seeing if you guys would notice.
So he was trying to peek in the windows because girls can't see him. That's what Plato said. If you get that ring, you're going to be peeping and creeping in windows. So.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, no, I really appreciate you having us on. Like, you guys, a couple of my favorite dudes to stream with. Maybe one of my favorite streams in a long time. I think it's top notch topics, and you guys have so much insight that always makes me so excited. I start thinking about other things, and I definitely enjoy bouncing off you guys, and would relish the opportunity and to anytime do it again.
Well, thanks, man. Again, you guys have been really monumental in my own journey, so I'm really thankful for you guys coming on. Adam Infinitum. Right. Go ahead, brother.
No, you had. I thought you were done.
Adam Infinitum throws in $10 and says, "Ooh wee, Jay Divine, Indy D, and Primal T don't get much better, y'all. Shout out from the 859. Y'all know. God bless." Well, shout out to Adam Infinitum. Rachel Wilson throws in $4.99 and says, "This stream is absolute fire. Very nice work, fellas. Thank you." Chase Haggard, a familiar name to you, Tristan, says, "Music can be a powerful tool of manipulation. You can repeat objectively dissonant intervals like playing diminished chords stacked upon another without resolution, and anyone listening will get more and more on edge despite their personal music tastes." And yeah, I think that's music is another really fertile ground for where magic is being done. Again, this sort of techno-magic, infusing the music with magical things. Mantras. We saw the Travis Scott concert last year basically be a religious ritual of some type of satanic ritual.
I forgot to mention Carol, that guy he's the granddaddy of, if Crowley is the father of modern esoteric occult Satanism, Carol is the granddaddy, and he's the guy that came up with the idea of techno-magic and techno-paganism. Have you heard of him?
Yes.
Yeah. And he calls it like the perfect form of chaos magic and that kind of stuff.
And we see it right now in our world. I mean, could the Great Reset happen without the full digital
computer? Yeah, exactly.
It couldn't.
Frankie, the internet is like the web of chaos that's intended to sort of spark this final aeon,
right? Which is definitely
the destruction and the chaos and all of this just clears the space for the new. Like you look at the revolution, it always starts with, you start with the idea of unlimited freedom and you end with unlimited despotism, like Dostoevsky says, and you see that with Napoleon. You get the God Emperor, right? You have the destruction of God and the removal of monarchy, the removal of order, complete chaos, and then everybody's killing each other, and then man claims he's the God Emperor, and you get Stalin. Same thing every time.
He wrote a book called Cyber Magic, Psybermagic. Mm-hmm. The guy was crazy.
Yeah, and looking at the 21st century use of these machines and what is the sort of paradigm or spirituality, and describing it as its own sort of worldview. That comes from Frankie D. It's $5. Says, "Hey bros, so cool to see you all on at the same time. Please pray for me if you remember me." Well, thank you so much, Frankie D. I'll definitely say a prayer for you, brother. Tatiana throws in $5. "Christ is risen. After reading Father Seraphim Rose and others, I finally see the psyop. This all is. Trust God above all." And then the Orthodox Logos throws in $10. "Christ is risen. Good seeing you all here together. Great stream. Just released a B video and didn't realize this was on at the same time. So here I am. God bless. Talk to you soon." Thank you, truly. Christ is risen. Thank you, Orthodox Logos. And Dr. Mo throws in $20 and says, "Potatoes, boil them, mash them, stick them in a stew." Shout out to Dr. Mo. Storm the Cat throws in $5 and says hi. And then Will Work for Wisdom throws in $5. "I've taken so many notes and bought several books on Audible during this talk. Chat stream was very informative too. Thank you. More, please." Will do. Work of Wisdom. And then last one is Corey for $5. Says, "Thanks, guys. For Jay, is soul selling really possible, or is it just a saying? And for DPH, if you don't mind me asking, how did you meet your girlfriend? Thanks again. God bless. I met her online having similar interests," and then started messaging. Jay, do you want to talk about, is it really possible for somebody to sell their soul?
Well, I mean, if we aren't in Christ, we already have.
Right.
So in that sense, everybody can do that. I mean,